In February 1959, 9 experienced Soviet hikers set out into the Ural Mountains. None of them made it back alive. "65 years later, we still don't have a complete answer. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk was a hub for outdoor adventure clubs in late 1950s Soviet Russia. Hiking, skiing, and mountaineering were deeply embedded in Soviet youth culture, part sport, part ideology. In January 1959, a group of 10 set off from Sverdlovsk. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student and seasoned hiker. The rest ranged from fellow students to one older veteran of the group, 37-year-old Semyon Zolotaryov, a decorated World War II veteran who had joined the trip almost as an afterthought. 9 of the 10 would reach the mountain. The 10th, Yuri Yudin, turned back early due to joint pain, a decision that saved his life and that he would carry with him for the rest of his years. Their destination was Otterten, a mountain in the northern Urals. The route was graded Category 3, the highest difficulty level for Soviet hiking expeditions at the time. Experienced as they were, this was a serious undertaking. The group traveled by train to the small town of Ivdel, then onward to the last inhabited outpost, the village of Vijay. From there, it was wilderness. Their plan was to reach Otterten by approximately February 12th, then return and telegraph back to the Institute confirming their safety. We know a remarkable amount about the early days of the trek because the group kept detailed diaries and took photographs. Their journals record good spirits, jokes, and the ordinary hardships of a winter expedition. Cold gear, heavy loads, tiring days on skis. On February 1st, the group began ascending the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl, a name that translates from the indigenous Mansi language as Dead Mountain. Weather conditions worsened. Visibility fell. Rather than retreat to the tree line, Dyatlov made the decision to push on and camp on the open slope. That decision would be the last entry in any of their journals. The final diary entry, found later, ends with a casual joke about wind and cold. Whatever happened next happened fast. When February 12th passed with no telegram from Dyatlov, no one panicked immediately. Mountain expeditions ran late, but as days became a week and a week became 2, the Institute's sports club raised the alarm. A search party was dispatched. On February 26, 1959, 25 days after the group had last been seen, search teams found the tent on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. What they found stopped them cold. The tent was still standing, partially collapsed under snow, but intact, except for one detail. The side facing the slope had been cut or torn open from the inside. Inside, they found the group's belongings untouched: food, warm clothing, boots, equipment. All 9 people had left on foot, downhill, in socks or bare feet, in temperatures that had likely dropped to -25°C or below. Something had driven them out so fast they left everything behind. The footprints led searchers downhill toward a cedar tree at the edge of the forest. There, they found the first 2 bodies. At the base of a tall cedar tree, searchers found Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonashenko. They were barely dressed, in underwear and socks. Branches on the cedar had been broken as high as 5 meters up, suggesting someone had climbed it, possibly to look back up the slope, possibly to gather firewood. Between the cedar and the tent on the open slope, they found 3 more: Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. All 3 were positioned as if they had been trying to crawl back up the slope, back toward the tent. Slobodin had a small fracture in his skull, likely not fatal on its own. Cause of death for all 5: hypothermia. They had frozen to death in the open, without adequate clothing. The medical examinations found no external injuries that could explain why they had fled the tent. The mystery deepened. In May, as snow melted, searchers found a makeshift den in a ravine roughly 75 meters from the cedar tree. Inside, covered by 4 meters of snow, were the final four: Dubinina, Zolotaryov, Kolovatov, and Thibaut Brignolel. They had apparently attempted to build a shelter. The injuries found on these four were extraordinary. Nicolas Thibaut Brignolel had a catastrophic skull fracture. Ludmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov each had multiple bilateral rib fractures, the kind of internal force consistent with a car crash or an industrial press. The lead investigator noted there were no external wounds corresponding to these internal injuries. Nothing on the skin explained the broken bones inside. Radiation. That was the next shock. When clothing from Krivonashenko and Dubinina was tested, it came back with elevated levels of radioactive contamination, beta radiation specifically. No explanation was ever officially provided for why two hikers on a wilderness expedition were wearing radioactive clothing. Soviet authorities launched an official investigation under Prosecutor Lev Ivanov. What followed was, by any measure, unusual. The case was closed in May 1959, the same month the last bodies were found, with the cause officially listed as a compelling unknown force. The files were classified. Ivanov himself, decades later, in a 1990 interview after the Soviet Union had begun to collapse, admitted that he had been ordered to close the case quickly and to attribute the deaths to natural causes. He also claimed he had witnessed search personnel reporting strange glowing orange spheres in the sky over the Urals during the search period in February and March. The group's cameras had been recovered from the tent. Most rolls yielded ordinary expedition photographs, the ones we still see today. But one roll produced a series of blurry, overexposed frames taken in darkness. Some researchers believe these final frames were taken at the moment of the incident. Others argue they were accidental exposures. Whatever those final frames captured, they were never definitively explained. The originals remained in state archives for decades. Theory 1. Avalanche. This was the most persistent mainstream explanation for decades. A snow slab breaks loose, strikes the tent, causes panic, drives the group into the dark. But investigators in 1959 found no evidence of an avalanche path at the scene. The slope angle, roughly 23 degrees, is below typical avalanche thresholds. And crucially, the tent was still standing. Theory 2. Infrasound. The specific geography of the Kholat-Shyakhl slope may have created conditions for katabatic wind to generate infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below human hearing. At the right frequency, infrasound can induce powerful feelings of dread, disorientation, and panic. Some researchers argue this could explain why 9 experienced, rational hikers abandoned all their equipment and ran into lethal cold for no visible reason. Theory 3. Soviet military activity. The Urals in 1959 were dotted with closed military installations. The radioactive clothing, the classified files, the rushed closure, and the glowing spheres reported by searchers have led some researchers to propose that the group stumbled into, or was caught under, a weapons test. Perhaps a parachute-deployed munition, an experimental device, or a misfired missile from a test range. The Soviet space program and weapons testing were in full acceleration in 1959. Sputnik had launched just 14 months earlier. The idea that something fell from or passed through that sky and triggered the evacuation is not impossible. What it doesn't easily explain is the nature of the crushing internal injuries with no external marks. Theory 4. Mansi attack. The Mansi are the indigenous people of the northern Urals. The mountain the group camped on was considered sacred by some Mansi communities. Early investigators briefly considered that Mansi tribespeople may have driven the hikers off. This theory was quickly discarded. The Mansi interviewed were cooperative, and the nature of the injuries didn't fit a human assault. In 2021, researchers from the Swiss Federal Institute of Snow and Avalanche Research published a peer-reviewed model proposing a specific small, delayed slab avalanche. One compact enough to leave minimal surface evidence, but generating enough force to cause the internal injuries. They modeled it computationally and found it physically plausible. Many scientists accepted it as the most credible explanation to date. Not all were convinced. Here is what the evidence actually confirms. The tent was exited in a controlled manner. They cut it open rather than using the door, which suggests something was blocking the outside or they needed to move fast and low. They left everything. They moved downhill in a coordinated group. At least 4 of them lived long enough to build a rudimentary den in the ravine. The injuries to those 4 are the single most difficult fact in this case to explain with any conventional theory. The missing soft tissue, tongue, eyes, lips, on Dubinina's body is perhaps the most disturbing element. The official explanation offered at the time was decomposition and scavenging by animals. Forensic researchers have since argued the tissue was absent before significant decomposition occurred. Others maintain that post-mortem aquatic scavenging in the snowmelt water of the ravine is a sufficient explanation. What's equally telling is the timeline of the Soviet response. The case was opened and closed within months. Files were sealed at a regional KGB level. The lead investigator was told to stop. When Russia declassified portions of the case files in 2019, investigators announced they were reopening the case. Their conclusion, released later, was an avalanche. Critics noted that the newly released files remained partially redacted. Yuri Yudin, the man who turned back, spent the rest of his life haunted by what happened to his friends. He visited the memorial at Dyatlov Pass multiple times. He spent decades trying to understand it. He died in 2013 at age 75 without an answer. Before his death, he said, "I want to know what happened. I want this resolved before I go." A memorial now stands at the pass that bears Igor Dyatlov's name. Hikers still travel there. The route still draws adventurers. The mountain is still called Dead Mountain. What the mountain knows, it hasn't told us. 9 people walked into it. Whatever they encountered in the dark and the cold, they took with them. Our assessment. The 2021 slab avalanche model is the most scientifically rigorous explanation on the table. It accounts for the tent exit, the internal injuries, and the flight downhill. But it does not cleanly explain the radiation. It does not explain why the case was classified by the KGB. It does not explain the glowing spheres, which were reported not just by one witness, but by multiple independent observers during the search operation. The most honest reading of the Dyatlov Pass incident is that it may involve multiple overlapping factors, a natural trigger followed by a situation made catastrophically worse by secrecy, cold, and chaos. The Soviet state's reflex toward classification turned a tragedy into an enduring mystery. Whatever the full truth is, it is buried somewhere between a mountainside in the Urals, a redacted KGB file, and a winter night in 1959 that no one survived to describe. This is Null Sector. Case NS-001 is open. Sources, full case documents, and our research notes are linked below. If you have information relevant to any Null Sector case, the submission form is in the description. We'll see you at the next file.